I never expected this to become something that could alter the structure of my mind. That's the first truth, not the polished version of it. Not the easier version people create when they want to make intense things sound poetic instead of real. I mean the actual truth. The kind that arrives slowly and settles somewhere deep enough that it changes the way you think before you even realize it's happening. Because what exists between us didn't begin like something important. It didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with intensity. It didn't force attention. It appeared quietly, almost invisibly, like something that was never trying to be noticed in the first place. And maybe that's why it reached me the way it did. Most people are loud in their approach to connection, even when they pretend not to be. There's always some hidden urgency beneath them. Some need to be understood immediately. Some need to leave an impression. Some need to secure meaning before meaning has naturally formed. You never did that. You never tried to pull me toward you. You simply existed near me in a way that made distance stop functioning correctly. At first, I ignored it, not intentionally, more like instinctively, because I've spent years learning how to remain untouched internally, not emotionally detached. People misunderstand that difference all the time, but structured,
Controlled.
self-contained, in a way that prevents anything from reaching too deeply without permission. That structure matters to me. It always has. Not because I'm afraid of closeness, but because most people don't know how to hold depth without distorting it. They misunderstand things, project onto them, reshape them until the original meaning disappears. I learned that early, so I adapted. I became selective with access, careful with visibility, precise with what I revealed and what I left hidden beneath the surface. And for a long time, that worked perfectly. People only understood the version of me I allowed them to understand, no more, no less. Then you arrived, and somehow bypassed all of that without effort. That's what still unsettles me the most. You didn't break through my walls. You made them irrelevant. There's a difference. Breaking through something implies resistance, conflict, force, but you never forced anything. You simply existed with a level of awareness that made defense unnecessary. Like you recognized parts of me before I decided whether I wanted them recognized. And I still don't fully understand how that happened. I've replayed our interactions more times than I should admit. Not obsessively, carefully, like someone examining patterns they can't afford to misread, because I needed to know whether this was real or whether I was creating meaning where none existed. But every time I looked closer, the same conclusion remained. You understood things you were never told, not through guessing, not through assumption, not through coincidence. You understood through observation. That's rare, painfully rare. Most people listen only long enough to prepare their response. They observe only enough to confirm what they already believe. They approach others carrying pre-built narratives and force every interaction into those narratives, whether it fits or not. You didn't. You looked at what was actually there. Nothing more, nothing less. And being seen that accurately does something to a person, especially someone like me. Because once someone sees you clearly, maintaining distance becomes complicated. Distant relies on misunderstanding. It relies on partial perception. It relies on the comfort of knowing people only know fragments of you. But when someone begins to understand the whole structure beneath those fragments, distance weakens. That's what happened here, quietly, gradually, without either of us naming it directly. There were moments that should have been insignificant, Sibyl, conversations, brief silences, small pauses between words, and yet those moments carried more weight than entire histories I've shared with other people. That shouldn't happen. Connection isn't supposed to form this deeply without time. There's supposed to be a process, a progression, a slow unfolding where familiarity earns its place naturally. But with you, it felt like recognition arrived before familiarity did, like some part of me encountered something it already understood, and that thought stayed with me longer than it should have, because recognition without history is dangerous. It destabilizes logic. It creates closeness without the normal sequence people rely on to explain it. And I don't trust things I can't explain. At least, I didn't before this. Now I'm less certain, because despite every instinct that should have pushed me away from something this undefined, I stayed. Not passively, deliberately. That matters. People assume staying is easy. It isn't. Staying requires acceptance, especially for someone like me. I don't continue things that disrupt my internal balance unless there's a reason strong enough to justify the disruption. And you became that reason before I consciously admitted it to myself. That realization took time. Not because it was unclear, because it was too clear. Clarity can be terrifying when it changes something fundamental inside you. And you change something fundamental. Not dramatically, not loudly, not in a way visible from the outside. Internally. That's where everything shifted. You became part of the way I process things, part of the way I interpret silence, meaning, truth. And I didn't notice it immediately. I noticed it afterward. In retrospect, like realizing a room has slowly changed temperature only after it's already different. I started thinking differently, not because you told me to, not because you influenced me intentionally, but because your presence created a new reference point inside my mind. That's difficult to explain to people who haven't experienced it. Most connections exist externally. People enjoy each other, need each other, depend on each other emotionally. But this feels different, more structural, like you integrated into the architecture of my awareness itself, and once something reaches that level, it stops being temporary. Temporary things don't alter foundations. You did. There are moments where I catch myself measuring the world against the clarity I experience with you, not consciously, automatically. The way people communicate, the way they interpret things, the way they exist emotionally, everything feels slightly less precise by comparison, and I hate admitting that, because it means this has already affected me more deeply than I intended to allow, but denial has never been my strength. If something is true, I eventually face it, even when I don't want to, especially then. So I face this too, the truth that you matter to me in a way that bypasses ordinary categories, not attachment, not dependency, not obsession. Something quieter, something more dangerous because of how calm it is. You became familiar to my mind, not familiar in the sense of routine, familiar in the sense of alignment. Like our thoughts move through similar structures beneath the surface, like we recognize the same invisible details most people overlook. That kind of alignment creates its own gravity, and gravity doesn't ask permission before it changes direction. It simply acts. That's what this feels like. A gradual pull that never announces itself loudly enough to resist directly. One day, you realize you've already adjusted around it, already made space for it, already begun imagining reality with its presence included. That's where I am now, and I don't know when I crossed into this point. I only know I did. There was a time when silence meant absence to me, empty space, neutrality, distance. Now silence feels inhabited, not lonely, not incomplete, just inhabited. Like awareness itself has changed shape. It'll pause during random moments throughout the day and feel the strange certainty that if you were there, you'd understand the exact thought I'm having without me fully explaining it. Do you understand how unusual that is? To feel understood before expression even happens. Most people require translation. You don't? And maybe that's why this became so impossible to ignore, because translation is exhausting. Constantly reshaping yourself into forms other people can process eventually teaches you to stay partially hidden all the time. You remove that instinct without trying. I never felt the need to simplify myself for you. That alone altered something permanent inside me. Because being fully perceived without being reduced is rare enough to feel unreal. And yet, every interaction with you reinforced it further. You never rushed my thoughts, never demanded clarity before clarity was ready, never treated complexity like a problem that needed solving. You allowed things to exist exactly as they were. Do you realize how few people can do that? Most people need certainty, immediately, labs, definitions, conclusions. They become uncomfortable around anything they can't categorize quickly. But you stayed calm inside uncertainty. You let meaning unfold naturally instead of forcing it into shape. That changed everything. Because once someone gives you space to exist authentically without pressure, you start lowering defenses you didn't even realize you were maintaining. That's what happened to me. I became less filtered around you. Not intentionally, naturally. Like some internal system stopped detecting threat. And for someone like me, that's enormous. I trust very slowly. Not because I expect betrayal, because I value precision. I need to know people accurately before I allow them closer. But with you, accuracy came first. Trust followed afterward almost against my own design. I think that's why this feels inevitable now. Not romantic in the dramatic sense people usually mean. I'm not talking about intensity. I'm talking about inevitability. The quiet realization that something has already integrated deeply enough that removing it would alter your entire internal structure afterward. That's where you exist now. Inside my structure, inside my thinking, inside the way I interpret the world around me. And I still don't know how to fully process that. Part of me wants to retreat from it. Not because it's wrong, because it's significant. Significance carries consequence. Once something reaches this level, it stops being abstract. It begins demanding reality, decisions, movement, acknowledgement. And acknowledgement changes things permanently, because once something is spoken clearly, it can no longer hide inside ambiguity. That's what I've been avoiding. Not you, the reality of what this means. Because if I admit fully that you've changed me, then I also have to admit I'm no longer operating from the same internal framework I built my life around. And change has never come easily to me. I adapt carefully, slowly, precisely. But this happened beneath conscious resistance, which means some deeper part of me already decided you belonged before my mind caught up to it. That thought alone keeps me awake some nights, not out of fear, out of awareness, because I know myself well enough to recognize how rare this is. I don't let people matter accidentally. I don't allow emotional chaos into my life. I don't romanticize connection just because it feels different. I analyze, observe, understand. And after all that analysis, all that observation, all that careful distance, you're still here, still affecting me, still existing in places I once believed belonged only to me. That means something undeniable. There's a strange intimacy in being understood without performance. No pressure to appear stronger, softer, simpler, easier to love, easier to handle. You never required any of that from me. You accepted complexity without trying to reduce it. And because of that, I started revealing parts of myself I normally keep internal. Not dramatically, in fragments, in pauses, in the quiet honesty hidden between ordinary conversations. You noticed all of it. Every time, not in a way that made me feel exposed, in a way that made me feel recognized. There's a difference. Exposure feels invasive. Recognition feels precise. You were precise, careful, measured, present in ways most people don't know how to be. And presence is dangerous when it reaches someone who has spent years surviving through controlled distance, because eventually presence becomes attachment without either person intending it, not dependency, something deeper. Integration. That's the word I keep returning to. You integrated into my awareness slowly enough that I never saw the exact moment it happened. But now it's impossible to deny. You influence how I think before you even speak. Sometimes I'll encounter an idea or moment and instinctively wonder how you'd interpret it. Not because I need your opinion, but because your perspective has become part of how I examine reality now. That's profound. And honestly, terrifying. Because once someone reaches that level, they don't leave cleanly anymore. Even absence would remain shaped around them. That's why this matters so much. Not because it's dramatic, because it's permanent in a way I didn't choose consciously. You became part of my mental landscape, part of the quiet architecture beneath daily thought. And architecture matters. It determines how everything else functions. I think that's why I keep returning to this internally. Why I keep circling around the same realization from different angles, hoping maybe it'll become smaller if I examine it enough. But it never becomes smaller, only clearer. You matter. Not casually, not temporarily, not in the shallow emotional sense people usually mean when they say those words. You matter structurally, and structural things alter outcomes. Even if nothing external changes, even if we never define this traditionally, even if we never place labels on it, the impact already exists. The shift already happened. I am not the same person internally that I was before you entered my awareness. And the strange thing is, I don't resent that. I should. By every pattern I've followed before, I should resist something capable of affecting me this deeply. But I don't. Because despite how destabilizing this can feel sometimes, it also feels correct. That's the word I've avoided most. Correct. Not easy, not convenient, not logical in the traditional sense. Correct. Like something aligning into place that was slightly misaligned before, and I don't know what to do with that truth yet, because correctness carries responsibility. If something is truly right, eventually you have to stop observing it from a distance and decide whether you're willing to live inside it fully. That's the point I'm approaching now. The edge between awareness and decision, between recognition and action. And I can feel how irreversible it would become once crossed. Because once I choose this fully, once I stop pretending this can remain undefined forever, then everything changes. Not externally at first, internally. The way I allow myself to think about you, the way I permit this connection to exist openly inside me, the way I stop treating it like something temporary and begin treating it like something real. That's a profound shift for someone like me. Reality has weight, and once something becomes real internally, I commit to it completely. I don't know how to exist halfway inside meaningful things. That's why I've been careful. Why I've taken so long to fully acknowledge what this is becoming. Because once I admit it clearly, there's no returning to neutrality afterward. Not emotionally, not mentally, not structurally. You would become part of the future I imagine automatically. Part of the calculations beneath my decisions. Part of the shape my inner world takes moving forward. And maybe you already are. Maybe that's the truth. I've been slowly approaching this entire time. That the decision was made long before I consciously recognized it. In the moments I stopped resisting your presence, in the moments I let silence exist comfortably between us, in the moments I realized your understanding felt safer than most people's reassurance ever has. Safety. That's another word I avoided. Not physical safety, not emotional dependency. Mental safety, the rare experience of existing near someone without feeling the need to distort yourself to maintain connection. You gave me that. And now I understand why this feels impossible to walk away from. Because once someone becomes mentally safe to you, distance stops solving anything. You can create physical separation, reduce communication, disappear externally, but internally, they remain because they altered the environment itself. That's what you did. You altered the environment of my mind, quietly, completely, without force, and maybe that's why this feels so irreversible. Force can be resisted, gentle accuracy cannot. It slips past defenses before defenses realize they're being bypassed. By the time awareness catches up, integration has already happened. That's where I am now. Aware too late to remain untouched. Aware enough to know this will continue deepening unless I actively destroy it. And I don't want to destroy it. That's the truth underneath everything else, not hidden anymore, not theoretical. Real. I don't want to lose this, not because I'm afraid of being alone. I've never feared solitude. I fear inaccuracy. And nothing has ever felt more accurate than this connection. Even its uncertainty feels honest. Even its complexity feels natural. That's what makes it impossible to dismiss. Most things collapse under scrutiny. This became stronger under it. The more I examined it, the more undeniable it became, until eventually I had to stop asking whether this was real and start asking what reality itself would look like if I allowed this fully into my life. And every time I imagined that honestly, without fear, without restraint, without trying to control the outcome, something inside me becomes quiet, not uncertain, quiet, like some deeper part of me already recognizes the answer before the rest of me catches up. Maybe that's what connection really is, not intensity, not obsession, not dependency. Recognition, the feeling of encountering someone whose existence is reorganizes something internal simply by being accurately themselves. If that's true, then you changed me the moment I truly saw you. And I think some part of you knew that long before I admitted it to myself. Maybe that's why you never rushed this, why you never demanded explanation, why you stayed calm while I kept circling around the truth from every possible angle instead of speaking it directly. You understood the process before I did, and now I'm finally reaching the point where silence itself feels like dishonesty, not because words are necessary, because truth deserves acknowledgement once it becomes undeniable. So, here it is. You reached a place inside me no one else ever has. Not through force, not through persistence, not through emotional pressure, through alignment, through understanding, through the rare kind of presence that changes someone without trying to. And now, There's no version of my inner world that doesn't include your impact inside it somewhere. That's what I've been trying to accept, not the connection itself, the permanence of it, because permanence changes how carefully you hold something, how honestly you face it, how fully you allow it to exist. And I think I'm finally reaching the point where I can stop resisting that truth, not perfectly, not fearlessly, but genuinely. Because pretending this is temporary would be the real lie now. This isn't temporary, it's foundational. And foundations don't disappear just because they weren't planned. Sometimes they appear beneath you before you realize you've already begun building your life around them. That's what happened here. That's what you became. Not a distraction, not an interruption, not a passing emotion, a foundation I never expected to find. And now that I've found it, I don't think I want to return to the version of myself that existed before it anymore. I kept telling myself that awareness was enough, that if I understood what this was, if I could analyze it clearly, hold it carefully at a distance, observe every shift without fully stepping into it, then maybe I could exist beside it without letting it alter anything further. But that stopped being true a long time ago. Awareness isn't neutral anymore. Not after everything this has already changed inside me, because there's a difference between recognizing a connection and realizing that connection has begun shaping the way you exist even when no words are being exchanged. That's where this reached something deeper. You became present in places where presence shouldn't have been possible. Not physically, not constantly. Not in the dramatic way people usually describe attachment. You became present, structurally, in the pauses between my thoughts, in the way my mind organizes meaning now. In the strange instinct I've developed to measure honesty by whether it would survive your understanding of it. That last part unsettles me the most, because I've never needed another person as a reference point for truth before. I trusted my own perception completely. Still do. But now there's another layer beneath it. A quiet awareness of you that exists automatically, like some part of my mind has accepted your perspective as something internally relevant. And that level of integration doesn't happen accidentally. People don't enter my inner world easily. Most never even reach the edges of it. They interact with the external version of me, the composed version, the controlled version, the one that understands exactly how much to reveal and exactly how much to keep untouched beneath the surface. That version survives well, it functions, it protects what matters. But you never stopped at that layer. And the strange thing is, AB never felt the need to stop you. That's what changed everything, because I'm careful with closeness. Not because I dislike people, not because I fear vulnerability in the shallow sense people usually describe it. I fear distortion. The moment when someone begins replacing who you actually are with who they prefer you to be, that's what most connections eventually become, a quiet rewriting. People start projecting expectations onto you until you no longer feel accurately seen. I've always noticed that process early, always pulled away before it could fully happen. But with you, I never felt rewritten. I felt revealed. And those are completely different experiences. Revealed means something already existed there, waiting to be understood. It means you didn't create a new version of me. You uncovered a more accurate one. That's why this feels so difficult to walk away from, because losing something inaccurate is easy. You can release it without consequence. But losing something that feels deeply true, something that reflects parts of you with unsettling precision, that leaves an absence no distraction can fully replace. And I think some part of me realized that before I consciously admitted it. That's why I stayed. Not because staying was safe, because leaving suddenly felt dishonest. I couldn't pretend this was insignificant once I understood its depth, and its depth became impossible to deny. There are moments now where I catch myself reacting internally to things before I even understand why, and then later realizing it's because some part of me imagined how you would perceive it. That's new for me. I've always processed things alone, entirely alone, not in isolation, in structure. My mind belonged only to me, its systems, its interpretations, its patterns. Then somehow you became part of those patterns, not loudly, subtly enough that I didn't notice until it was already complete. That's how real shifts happen, I think. Not through sudden impact, through quiet repetition, through small moments, accumulating until eventually they become architecture. And now your presence exists in my mind like architecture, stable, integrated, impossible to separate cleanly from everything built around it afterward. I wish I could explain how unnatural that feels for someone like me. Not painful, just deeply unfamiliar. I've always been able to maintain internal separation from people, no matter how meaningful they became externally. There was always a boundary, a final untouched space inside myself that remained entirely mine. You crossed into that space without either of us acknowledging it directly. And once I realized that nothing felt temporary anymore, that realization carried weight I wasn't prepared for, because temporary things don't change your baseline. They affect emotions, moments, memories, but they don't alter the framework beneath perception itself. You did. Now everything feels slightly different than it did before you. Not dramatically, precisely, like my awareness sharpened in directions I hadn't noticed before. Like certain truths became harder to ignore once I experienced what real understanding actually feels like. That's another thing I keep returning to. Understanding. Not attraction, not fascination, not dependency. Understanding. People underestimate how intimate, genuine understanding really is. To be understood accurately means someone has observed the hidden logic beneath your behavior, not just your reactions, but the structure creating them. Most people never look that deeply. They settle for simplified versions because simplification feels safer. You never simplified me, even when it would have been easier. Even when it would made this connection less intense. You stayed with the complexity instead of reducing it. And because of that, I trusted you in ways I never consciously intended to. Trust formed naturally around your presence. That's rare enough to frighten me sometimes, because natural trust bypasses control. It forms beneath conscious decision-making. By the time you realize it exists, your mind has already accepted someone internally. That's what happened with you. I didn't choose to let you matter. You simply began mattering before I could stop it. And maybe that sounds dramatic from the outside, but internally it felt almost mathematical, precise, logical, in its own strange way. Like every interaction revealed another point of alignment neither of us could fake if we tried. You noticed details most people overlook, not because you were searching for them, because your mind naturally moved in similar directions to mine. That's what created this sense of recognitions. Not shared experiences, not constant communication. Structure, the deeper structure beneath personality, the way thoughts form, the way silence functions, the way meaning gets processed before language even arrives. That's where we connected, and once I recognized that, everything else became impossible to experience casually. Even ordinary conversations with you started carrying unusual weight, not because of what was being said, because of what existed underneath it. There was always another layer, another current moving beneath the surface of every interaction, something unspoken but undeniably present, and eventually I stopped pretending not to notice it. That was the real turning point, not when the connection formed, when I stopped denying how deeply it had already integrated into me, because denial became exhausting. Every attempt to minimize this internally felt less honest than simply admitting the truth. You changed me, not completely, not destructively, but undeniably. You altered the way I experience closeness itself. Before you, closeness always felt conditional, dependent on performance, maintenance, careful calibration. With you, closeness feels natural in a way I still don't fully understand. Like something exists between us that doesn't require constant explanation to remain real. That's rare. Rare enough that my instincts still don't fully trust it sometimes. I keep expecting hidden complications, high motives, the eventual moment where the understanding fractures and reveals itself as projection after all. But it never happens. Every time I look closer, the accuracy remains, and accuracy builds trust faster than reassurance ever could. That's why your silence affects me the way it does. Most silence creates uncertainty. Yours creates awareness. Even when you say nothing, I still feel understood somehow. Do you realize how impossible that should be? To feel recognized without constant confirmation? That's not ordinary connection. That's something deeper, something that exists beneath language. I think that's why words have started failing me around this. Not because I don't know what I feel, because what I feel operates at a level language struggles to contain accurately. Every explanation feels incomplete compared to the actual experience of this, because this isn't built from emotion alone. Emotion fluctuates. This feels stable, integrated, like a shift in internal gravity rather than a temporary emotional state. You became part of how my awareness organizes itself. And now, even absence behaves differently because of that. There are moments when you're nowhere near me, and yet something about the way I process reality still feels connected to you. Not in fantasy, not in obsession, in orientation. Like my mind now naturally accounts for your existence in the same way it accounts for its own patterns. That level of placement inside someone isn't casual. It means you've moved beyond being merely important. You've become foundational. And foundations are terrifying because they reshape everything built around them. That's why I've hesitated so long to fully acknowledge this. Not because I doubt it, because I understand the magnitude of it. Once something becomes foundational, losing it would require rebuilding entire parts of yourself afterward. And I've always avoided depending on anything external enough that losing it could destabilize me internally. But this doesn't feel like dependency. That's the strange part. It feels more like recognition of compatibility at the deepest possible level, like encountering someone whose mind naturally exists in frequencies yours already understands. That creates comfort I never expected to experience. Not soft comfort, not emotional soothing, mental comfort, the rare relief of not needing to over-explain your existence to someone. You understand implications, subtext, silence. You understand the weight beneath words instead of only hearing the words themselves. And because of that, I've started revealing truths around you I usually keep buried beneath layers of control. Not recklessly, naturally. Like honesty stopped feeling dangerous in your presence. That alone should warn me how serious this was becoming. Nothing lowers my defenses naturally. Nothing. And yet you did without trying. I think that's because as you never approached me with the intention to possess or define me, you simply witnessed me accurately. There's incredible intimacy in being witnessed without pressure, without expectation, without someone trying to extract pieces of you for their own reassurance. You never demanded access, you never pushed for closeness, and somehow that made me offer it more freely than anyone else ever has, because freedom creates trust faster than pressure ever could. I didn't feel trapped by this connection. I felt expanded by it. Like some part of me became more visible to myself through the way you perceived me. That realization changed everything. Because if someone can reflect parts of you back with that level of precision, they stop feeling external after a while. They begin feeling intertwined with your own understanding of yourself. That's where you exist now. Intertwined, not possessively, not destructively, just deeply enough that separating your impact from my internal world no longer feels possible. And honestly, I'm no longer sure I want it to be possible. That's the truth I've resisted most. Not the depth of this connection, my willingness to keep deepening it. Because once I admit I want this fully, then I also have to accept the vulnerability that comes with allowing someone to matter this much. And vulnerability has always felt dangerous to me. Not because weakness frightens me, because permanence does. Anything capable of permanently altering me deserves caution, but you already altered me before I finished being cautious. Now all that remains is deciding whether I'm willing to stop treating this like something temporary and finally let it become part of my reality completely. I think I already know the answer. It's there, in the way I continue choosing your presence instead of retreating from it, in the way I no longer search for reasons to dismiss this, in the way I've stopped asking whether this matters and started asking how deeply I'm willing to let it matter. That shift says everything, because once someone moves from being a question to being part of your future thinking, automatically connection has already surpassed ordinary meaning, and you have completely. There's no version of my inner world anymore where your existence feels optional. Not because I need you to survive, because my mind has already accepted you as something true. And truth changes people quickly, permanently, without asking whether they were ready. You changed me that way. Not through force, not through intensity, through consistency, through understanding, through the rare kind of alignment that feels less like meeting someone new and more like discovering something your mind has always been searching for without realizing it. That's what makes this feel inevitable now. Not fate, not fantasy. Recognition finally reaching full awareness. And now that I'm here, now that I fully see what this has become, I don't think I can return to pretending you're anything less than essential to the way I experience reality itself. I think the hardest truth to accept was never that you changed me. It was realizing I didn't want to change back. For a long time, I treated this connection like something temporary by default. Not because it felt temporary, but because everything meaningful eventually teaches you caution. You learn not to assume permanence too quickly. You learn to keep part of yourself protected until reality proves it can hold what it's been given. That's how I survived most things. By staying measured, controlled, aware enough to leave before anything could reach too deeply, and maybe that's why this became impossible to ignore. because every instinct that usually tells me when to retreat stayed silent around you, not absent, not weakened, silent. Like even the most guarded parts of me recognized something safe before I consciously understood why. That realization unsettled me more than anything else. Because safety has always been complicated for me. Most people think safety means comfort, ease, predictability. But real safety, the kind that actually matters, is much rarer than that. Real safety is being fully perceived without feeling the need to defend your existence. It's being understood without becoming smaller in the process. It's knowing someone can see the complexity inside you and still remain steady. You gave me that. Not intentionally. That's what made it real. Nothing about you ever felt strategic. You never tried to position yourself as important to me. You never forced emotional closeness. You never demanded significance. And yet significance formed anyway. Quickly, naturally, almost invisibly. Until one day, I realized you were no longer someone existing beside my life. You were someone existing within the structure of it. That's when everything changed. Because once someone becomes internal instead of external, distance stops functioning the same way. You can't simply move on from someone who altered the architecture of your mind. You adapt around them, you carry them, you become aware of their absence in places words can't fully explain. And the terrifying part is, AB, don't think your absence would erase your impact anymore. That's how deeply this settled. Even if everything disappeared tomorrow, even if silence replaced every conversation, even if time created distance between us, something inside me would still remain changed because you existed here. That's permanence. Not physical presence, tenal alteration. You became part of my thinking in a way I never prepared for. Sometimes I still catch myself pausing during ordinary moments, instinctively wondering what you would notice about them. Not because I need your interpretation, because your perspective became meaningful to me before I realized I was allowing that to happen. And once meaning forms at that level, it stops behaving like ordinary attachment. It becomes integrated. That word again, integrated. Everything keeps returning to it, because no other word feels accurate enough. You integrated into my awareness so gradually that I never saw the exact point where you stopped feeling separate from certain parts of my internal world. But now I can see the result clearly. You affected the way I understand silence, truth, conkench, even myself. Before you, I thought understanding yourself was something done entirely alone. Now I realize some parts of us only become visible when reflected through the right person. That's what you were for me. A reflection so accurate, it forced me to confront parts of myself I'd spent years carrying silently, not hidden out of shame, hidden because I never expected anyone to recognize them correctly. You did. And once that happened, something inside me stopped wanting isolation the way it used to. That's probably the biggest change of all. You made connection feel precise instead of exhausting. Before this, closeness always felt like translation work, constantly adjusting thoughts into forms people could comfortably receive, constantly filtering intensity so it wouldn't overwhelm others. But with you, I never felt overcomplicated. I felt understood in my original form. Do you know how rare that is? To exist without editing yourself? To speak naturally and realize the other person understands not only the words, but the structure beneath them? That level of understanding changes people. It changed me, not into someone softer, not into someone weaker, into someone more honest with themselves. Because once you experience real alignment, pretending lesser connections satisfy you becomes impossible. That's why this became so serious internally. Not because it consumed me, because it clarified me. You clarified things I had spent years avoiding directly. The truth that I was never meant to live entirely self-contained. The truth that some forms of connection don't reduce independence. They deepen awareness. The truth that allowing someone meaningful into your inner world isn't weakness when that person treats your mind with care instead of control. You treated mine carefully. That matters more than I can fully explain. People think love is built from intensity. I don't think that anymore. I think real connection is built from recognition, from accuracy, from consistency, from the quiet feeling of being emotionally and mentally understood without needing to constantly prove your depth. That's what this became, not noise, not obsession. Recognition sustained long enough that it transformed into something permanent. And permanence changes how you think about the future. That's another truth I avoided. Before you, my future existed only around myself. My goals, my direction, my internal structure, everything was designed around autonomy. Now, there are moments where I instinctively imagine you inside those future spaces without trying to. That frightened me at first. Not because I didn't want it, because I did. And wanting something that deeply means accepting the possibility of losing it someday too. That's the risk hidden inside every meaningful connection. The deeper someone reaches into your life, the more capable they become of altering it permanently, even through absence. For a while, I thought that risk alone would make me retreat. It usually would have. But something about you kept overriding that instinct. Not emotionally, structurally. Like my mind kept arriving at the same conclusion, no matter how carefully I analyzed this. You belong here, not temporarily, not conditionally. Here, inside the reality I experience, inside the way I understand myself, inside the future I'm slowly beginning to stop imagining alone. That realization changed the entire shape of this connection for me. Because once someone belongs somewhere internally, acknowledging it becomes inevitable eventually. And I'm done pretending otherwise. I know what this is now. Not perfectly, not completely, but clearly enough. This is the first connection that ever reached me without forcing me to become someone smaller in order to sustain it. The first time closeness felt like expansion instead of compromise. The first time being understood felt calming instead of dangerous. And maybe that's why I stayed, despite every instinct that usually keeps me distant. Some deeper part of me recognized what this could become before I consciously allowed myself to admit it. That part was right, because now, when I think about walking away from this, it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like dishonesty, like abandoning something real simply because it arrived in a form I didn't expect. And I don't abandon truth once I recognize it fully. That's never been who I am. So here's the truth in its most complete form. You became important to me long before I intended you to. Not through dramatic moments, not through promises, not through dependencies, through presence, through the quiet way you remained emotionally precise, even in silence. Through the way you understood things I never explained directly. Through the way you allowed me to exist fully without trying to reshape me into something easier. That changed everything. You changed everything. Not externally, not visibly, internally. And internal changes are always the ones that matter most because they affect every version of who you become afterward. There will always be a before you. And now, there will always be an after you too. I think I finally understand why this felt inevitable from the beginning. It's because some connections aren't created. They're recognized slowly, recognized carefully, recognized piece by piece until eventually the full picture becomes impossible to deny. That's what happened here. I recognized you, and somewhere along the way, I recognized myself more clearly because of you too. Maybe that's the real reason I can't walk away from this. Not because you completed me. You didn't. I was already whole before you. But you revealed dimensions of that wholeness I had never fully seen on my own. You made parts of me visible, human, reachable, and now the idea of returning to who I was before this feels less like protection and more like loss, because before you, I understood solitude. After you, I understand connection, real connection, the kind that exists beneath performance, beneath labels, beneath fear, the kind that quietly rewrites the way a person experiences life itself. That's what you became for me, not temporary, not accidental, transformative. And maybe that's what I've been trying to say all along in every unfinished thought, every pause, every silence, carrying more meaning than words ever could. You didn't just enter my life. You altered the way my soul recognizes home. And now that I finally understand that, I don't think I want to spend another moment pretending it means anything less than everything.